We've been listening in there to Anthony Mason, a special report. The president in a press conference with the president of Finland as well, talking about a host of issues, not just Hurricane Harvey and the aftermath that Texas is dealing with, but also his decision to pardon Joe Arpaio. I want to bring in CBS News political director Steve Chaggaris, who joins us now from our Washington bureau. Steve, I want to get to the Arpaio situation, the fact that he came pretty prepared to deal with that question.
Yeah, and he set it up as Arpaio being a victim of basically a political hatchet job of the Obama administration, and juxtaposed that with other pardons from other presidents, and listed several what he called serious criminal offenses by these other folks that were pardoned by President Clinton and President Obama, and really basically said that, hey, Sheriff Joe was not nearly as bad as some of these other people that were pardoned, so cut him some slack because this was really a political hatchet job against him.
And this was a pardon, Steve, that he had issued on Friday night ahead of the situation with the hurricane. In the middle of all this, you know, a reporter asked him about the fact that there are other members of the Republican Party who did not agree with this decision. How is this playing out with the Republican Party in Washington?
Well, first of all, the timing of it obviously has some people rankled, mainly because it looks like he was trying to bury this among some other news. And then on top of that, there are Republicans who don't agree with this pardon. But again, you know, pardons are generally pretty controversial situation. That's why you see a lot of presidents do these things at the end of their terms, whether it's their last day or their last couple of days in office, mainly because they don't want to deal with the blowback for some of these pardons. And Trump rightfully makes the point that there were some really controversial pardons by previous presidents, some pretty tough pardons, pretty tough criminals that were pardoned by other presidents. But at the same time, this is just in the infancy of President Trump's administration. He did this at a time when the judicial process has not played out for Joe Arpaio, and really sort of preempted that whole process, which rankled some people as well. And so there are a lot of questions about this, and now he's going to have to answer them because he's doing it so early in his term. This is some people may say this is another thing that Donald Trump is setting himself up for answering and dealing with, and another distraction that really he didn't have to do right now.
And it's interesting because he joked that he expected higher ratings from his pardon of Joe Arpaio because the storm was making landfall. The other topic that came up during this press conference, Steve, was the funding of the border wall. President Trump repeated again, Mexico will pay for the wall, but today we heard him say, or perhaps they'll pay for it through reimbursement. He was challenged on his threat to shut down the government over the border wall funding. He says he hopes, you know, both the funding for the response to Harvey and the border wall can be separate than any government shutdown package. What did you make of his response to questions about the border wall? Mexico itself saying it will not pay for it.
Right, and so the story of how he would get Mexico to pay for the wall has morphed over time. You know, you remember 2 years ago when he announced his campaign, he just said Mexico is going to pay for the wall, and he left it at that. And then when pressed on that over the course of time, it became, well, perhaps it'll be reimbursement. Perhaps we'll figure out a way to have them pay for it, whether it's through some sort of reimbursement and not a direct, we're going to get them to write a check for billions of dollars to the United States. And then, of course, when the president was inaugurated and afterwards, shortly thereafter, he said, okay, Congress is going to pay for it first, and then we'll figure out a way for Mexico to pay for it, which had a lot of people asking the question, okay, well, how do you guarantee that Mexico is going to pay for that? That being said, on the shutdown question, he's been saying this for a couple of weeks, that if Congress doesn't fund payment for the wall, that he's threatening a shutdown. We have to look at Donald Trump and his philosophy in business and how he deals with things. If you look at Chapter 2 of Art of the Deal, and I keep hammering on this, one of the topics in there is use your leverage. And he feels that dangling the threat of a shutdown over Republicans in Congress is leveraged. Whether he's actually going to follow through on that remains to be seen. But I think going out there on Twitter and saying it publicly that shutdown is a potential answer to all this in order to get Republicans to put funding into the budget for the wall, that is, in his mind, using leverage to try to get Republicans to put that money in.
And Steve, he dodged an opportunity to single out Russia as a security threat when he was asked point blank whether Russia was a security threat. What'd you make of that?
It's just very consistent with how the president answers any question about Russia. He either dodges the question or lumps them in with everybody else and never really singles out Russia for anything negative, even if the question begs for an answer on that. And so, again, very consistent with how he's answered this. A lot of people have questions as to why he keeps doing this, but this is pretty typical Trump on that issue.
And what's interesting, Steve, is this is happening on a day when the Washington Post is reporting on a Trump Organization executive and personal attorney for the president sharing emails with a spokesperson for Vladimir Putin in 2016 discussing the development of a Trump Tower in Moscow. At the same time, candidate Trump at that point was saying, I have no dealings with Russia, my team doesn't, and it seems to fly in the face of that. CBS News confirming this report. Why isn't the president doing more to distance himself? As you say, what he said today has been consistent with, I hope we can have better relations with the country. Why not try and do the opposite?
You got me, Errol. I mean, this has been a question. It's been a question throughout, right? There's been this cloud over the president and over candidate Trump of the issue of Russia, and every time he's been asked about it, he's never gone hard against Russia. And so, again, it begs the question: why doesn't he just come out and go out full negative against Russia? We don't know the answer to that question yet. But with regards to the story, it's very interesting. It's yet another example of people in Trump's orbit having contact with people in Russia over a business deal mainly, these contacts are. And it raises the question, what exactly is the special counsel and are these investigators looking at? Is it ultimately going to wind up being the financial or potential financial dealings between people in Trump's orbit and Russian officials, or is it going to be collusion? Because, you know, as we see each of these pieces of evidence, we're not actually seeing evidence of collusion to throw the election, but we are seeing more and more examples of people in Trump's orbit trying to make financial deals, whether it's Paul Manafort, whether it's Michael Cohen, his lawyer, whether it's Carter Page. You go along down the line, and it all involves financial dealings with Russia. That's the big question. Is ultimately the answer here going to be the reason why they've been soft punching Russia is because they want to keep them open as a potential business partner? That's a big question. It's some people are saying it's totally unethical to be trying to make these kinds of deals when you're running for president. But does that lead to an illegality here? We don't know the answer to that question. I think that's what the investigators are going to really be looking into.
And Steve, I want to ask you about the politics of Hurricane Harvey. The president says he will, of course, go tomorrow morning down to that region and potentially back again over the weekend. Are you surprised that he's going to make a second trip over this weekend? And what do you think he needs to do when he gets down there?
Well, I think he needs to do what he's been doing, which is, you know, one of the things, this president gets a lot of criticism from a lot of sides. I think the handling of the hurricane, you know, it's hard to criticize what he's been doing, which is really sort of staying plugged in, encouraging federal and state and local authorities to continue to work hard on dealing with the hurricane. He's waiting to get down there and waiting for the right time to get down there as to not sap as many resources as a presidential visit would normally sap. He's going down there, you know, tomorrow, a few days after everything goes down, and then he may head back at the end of the week. That is a bit of a surprise to me, but again, you know, I think speaking about unity, speaking about working together, really these are moments in which presidents traditionally are sort of giving pep talks, are sort of backing the people who are working hard to get things straightened out in these places. And this is what this president has done, not raised a lot of controversy in his remarks as he had after perhaps the Charlottesville tragedy, where some people criticized him for not unifying enough. I think this is one example where he's actually been pretty consistent in a unifying message.
And Steve, just in our last moment here, will the president be able to dodge the fact that 5 months ago the Department of Homeland Security, under his leadership, suggested a cut to flood insurance and FEMA's overall budget in order to free up money for a border wall?
Well, it's interesting. You heard that question asked of him by a pretty Republican-friendly news outlet, OANN.
He complimented the
yeah,
network,
right.
in fact.
Exactly, but they asked him about that, and he dodged the question. I think right now the controversy over that is probably not, this isn't the right time for that. But yeah, I think you have a legitimate there's a legitimate question to be asked. And as this goes along, and as Texas and potentially Louisiana continue to clean up over the long term, these are questions he's going to have to answer, and we'll have to see if he actually holds to that original plan.
And the fact, Steve, that he said a government shutdown won't in any way impact funding to Hurricane Harvey. There are several bills out there that deal with funding right now. Is that correct when you're talking about politics and the way things get done and paid for?
Well, it's hard to say. He says it's all going to be taken care of and cleaned up before they get to that point. Keep in mind, a shutdown isn't for another 4 weeks or so. It's the end of September. So he could very well be right that the majority of the cleanup will have been, at least the money will have been allocated well before a shutdown. But still, what is a shutdown? How good does a shutdown look when you have a state and potentially a second state trying to clean up from historic devastation from Mother Nature? I don't know how well that looks politically.
Yeah, it certainly is very historic devastation, and a lot of folks wondering exactly what's going to happen come September as well, with so much legislation pending in addition to this. We want to thank you very much, Steve Chaggaris, for joining us.
Thanks.